with manufactured boards. We're up to video number 4 now. In manufactured boards, we're going to be looking at the different types of timbers that we use in furniture making that are not made directly from a tree. They're timber type products, okay? Products that are made of bits of timber. They look like solid timber, but they're actually man-made to improve some of the qualities. So you're going to know the difference between a solid timber and a manufactured board by the end of this video. You should know some of the types of manufactured boards. You should know how to distinguish between a solid wood and a manufactured board. And what we're going to do is we're going to get you to research one manufactured board from the list below. So you can pick plywood, chipboard, or MDF. And you're going to produce a 2-minute presentation on that manufactured board. And I'll give you some more information about that shortly. So let's get started with solid timbers. Solid timber, okay, so if I have a forest and I've got a tree growing and I chop that tree down and I cut it up into little pieces, that is called solid timber. It's naturally made. It's generally pretty expensive, okay, because we've got the cost of growing the tree, cutting the tree down, cutting it into pieces of tree. And when you're chopping a tree down, if parts of the tree are no good, then the wood is also no good. Okay, so wood can be expensive. I know it seems quite cheap, but generally as a cost per gram or cost per square meter or cost per linear meter, whichever sort of measurement you might like to use, solid timbers are generally expensive when we compare them to manufactured boards. Solid timbers can contain defects, knots for example, cupping, warping, twisting, bowing, spring. There's a whole heap of different defects that you'll learn about. And they're usually limited to smaller sizes. The biggest piece of timber you can have is dependent on how big the tree is. If you've only got a small tree, you can only get small bits of wood. If you've got a large tree, then you can get large bits of wood. So you've got to really think that the size of solid timber pieces is limited to the tree. So trees usually aren't 50 meters long, so you wouldn't be able to get a 50-meter long piece of solid timber ever. It just wouldn't be possible. Okay. Manufactured boards, however, these are man-made structures. So they're made of bits of real tree, bits of solid wood. Maybe it's made of chips or sawdust or whatever it might be. They're generally cheaper because they use leftover bits of pieces, or they might use recycled bits of pieces. Usually they're able to eliminate defects. So in a manufactured board, very rarely would you have a knot. And if you do have a knot, then the knot usually doesn't impact on the strength of the product. And the size is really only limited to the size of the machine that is being used to produce the manufactured board. Now, we say manufactured boards because we're not talking about just long pieces of timber anymore. We're talking about whole sheets of timber. So when I buy a manufactured board here for school, I'm talking a piece of timber that's about the size of a whiteboard in one of our classrooms. It's usually about 1.2 meters wide, and it's usually about 2.4 meters long. So it's quite a large piece of timber, what we call a sheet or a board. Okay, you normally can't get pieces of solid timber this big. Now I'm going to give you the first example. I'm going to do a short presentation on a product called hardboard. Hardboard is a manufactured board. The presentation that I do from now until the end of the lesson is the same sort of presentation that I want you to do. So I've shared a template of slides with you, has the same headings as what you're going to see here, and what you need to do is to do the same thing as me. I'm going to tell you about the product, how it's made and where it's used. You're going to do the same about either plywood, MDF or chipboard. You're going to tell me what it is, where it's used, how it's made, etc. So we'll get started. Hardboard. Hardboard is called hardboard sometimes. Sometimes it's called HDF or high density fiberboard. It is an engineered wood product. Okay? It is being specifically designed by humans to improve its qualities. There is no grain in hardboard. So if you're having a look here, you're going to see lines pointing some ways, line pointing the other way. There's no single grain direction. There are lots of tiny little fibers in it, but there is no grain. product is used in lots of different places. If you've got a workshop at home in your garage and you've got all your tools hanging up on a wall on a pegboard, that pegboard is probably made of hardboard, okay, or masonite product. We use it quite a lot when we're doing construction projects to hold our frames together to increase the strength there. They're used in the making of doors, okay, so a door in a house, not your external door, but your internal doors that usually get painted. Quite often they are made from a layer of HDF that makes them so strong that if you punch them, you usually can't punch through them, okay? Whereas if you were using some of the other timber products, you might be able to damage them. So there's a whole heap of extra strength around hardboard. We also use them a lot in furniture making at the back of the furniture. They're really strong, but they don't look very good. So when we do use them, we tend to hide them away where they're not visible. So for example, if you have an entertainment unit that your TV is sitting on, it's very possible that at the back of it, you've got a piece of hardboard. If you've got any IKEA furniture, it's very possible that the piece of timber at the back that sort of covers the drawers over might be made of hardboard as well that's been painted. Now, how is it made? I know this looks really confusing, but I'm going to simplify it for you. There are logs. The tree is chopped down and logs are sent to the shop. The logs go through a process where the bark gets taken off them, and then they get chipped into tiny little pieces, and the chips get sorted out into different sizes, and then the small pieces, they go into this section here, where they are basically put into a high pressure chamber. The pieces or the fibers of timber are exploded. They explode under a huge amount of pressure. Okay? So they put them into a machine, they soak them in water, and then they add a whole heap of pressure, and those timber fibers basically blow apart into individual pieces, individual fibers. Once that's done, they're dried out and they're sent all the way through the machine onto the conveyor belts, and they're transferred across onto another conveyor belt, and they're put into a large mat. Okay, a large mat, so they're laid out in like a big sheet. The big sheet is injected with a whole heap of glues, a whole heap of resins, which help to stick these fibers together. They are pressed really hard together between some metal plates. They're heated up, they're steamed, and they're really compressed into this really high density sheet of timber fibers. Once that's done, they are taken through the saw and chopped into smaller pieces and transferred across to this winding wheel of cooling equipment. So the sheet sits on here, then it winds around and drops it over here. It dries on its way over, and when it's dropped over here, they check the size of it, they sand it back when they need to, they might put a little wax coating on the back of it as well to make it look shiny. And they determine what quality it is, and they send it off to the shops, and we then go to Bunnings and buy it. So in a summary, little pieces of timber, chips of wood, are put into a big machine, they're exploded, they're joined in with a glue and built into a big sheet or a big board or a mat. They compress together, they're glued, they dry, and they're chopped into pieces. Here we go. How is hardboard made? 6 very simple steps. Okay. Now the last thing that I'm going to talk about with hardboard is what are the environmental impacts of using it and what are the environmental impacts of producing it? And this is something you're going to do with your manufactured board as well. So if I'm thinking about hardboard and the way that hardboard is produced, well, you've got to think it's a little bit good for the environment because we can use wood chips. So wood chips, I could get wood chips from the workshop, I could get wood chips from a sawmill, I could get wood chips from a whole heap of areas that are leftover products, and I can then use this leftover product into a brand new product. So that's really good for the environment because it prevents that timber from going into landfill or prevents it from being put into a fire and just burnt. The manufacturing process uses a lot of natural resources. There's a lot of electricity being used for this process. There's lots of fuels being used to run all the machinery and the motors and the equipment. There's a whole heap of resins that are going in which aren't so good for the environment either. So there's a lot of resources being used for the production of this product. In addition to that, while it's being produced, the factory is producing a whole heap of air emissions. So there might be some contaminated air, or there might be some smokes coming out of the factory. There's certainly a whole heap of wastewater that comes out of the factory. There's offcuts at the end of the process when the boards are cut to their final size. So those offcuts can no longer be used. So where do they go? Then there might be some reusable fibers that can be reused. So there's a lot of stuff coming out of the process as well. So there are some good things and some bad things about the way this product is produced. When we're thinking about the way that it's used, one of the reasons they created it was because of how strong it is. But the also reason they use it is because it enables us to not use solid timber. If we were using solid timber to do some of the things we do with hardboard, we'd be using a lot more of it. So whenever we don't need the aesthetics or the beauty of natural solid timber, if you're just looking for the strength, we should be looking at using manufactured boards like hardboard, for example. Okay, so whenever the aesthetics is not a criteria, we could use hardboard. And that helps to prevent deforestation. And it helps to mean that even the trees that are grown in those plantation forests can be used for other purposes where they have to be used. The other thing is, one of the downsides of using hardboard is because it's sold in such big sheets, okay, 1.2 meters wide, 2.4 meters long, that actually means that when I am using it for a piece of furniture, if I only have a small piece of furniture, I have to buy a whole sheet. Well, the rest of the sheet then becomes wastage. I can use it later for projects, but if I throw it in the bin, not very good for the environment. Okay. So that's hardboard. That's a little bit about hardboard. It's a little bit about how it's made, and a little bit about how it impacts on the environment when it's being produced, and a little bit about the environment when it's being used. I want you now to do the same. Go onto Google Classroom, get the template that I've shared with you, and I want you to pick either plywood, chipboard, or MDF, and I want you to do the same. Create some slides. How is it made? What are the environmental impacts? What is it? And I want you to, once you've made these slides, to record a really small little screen video, around about 2 minutes long, where you do the presentation. I want you to screencast the presentation. I want you to talk over top of it and explain to me what the product is that you have completed the research on. Okay? Good luck, and I tend to think that plywood is more exciting than the others, but it's totally up to you which one you'd like to select. So good luck.